Okay, we're going to look into a new wiki entry here into the dynastic race theory. Pretty much concentrates on Egypt and Sumeria and their connection across the Fertile Crescent, which brought about Egypt. But this kind of dovetails into a series that I recently did on dynastic race theory, and it said Japhethites, and that's referring to biblical things and how it connects, and how there is some truth in that, and the way you look at it depends on your interpretation, or if you get a correct interpretation out of the Bible, and maybe not something that's so SJW in modern form. Wow, that just went white there for a second. So this is a fairly newer entry and redone wiki article, and some of those I've gone over recently and everything. Of course, everybody is still trained to say wiki doesn't have it down and doing things, but I'm really impressed with them being able to pull together a lot of articles like this. They in fact have one on ancient Egyptians, and it's where I got this, and another one that I'm about to do. Ancient Egyptians probably going to be a multi-parter. This I plan to be in one. And there's been a lot of people chiming in and making it so much better. You know, they say you can't use it in a research paper and everything. Well, yeah, you can. See, secretly, you don't know it, but every single thing on here is ibbited down at the bottom of it with references. And then all you have to do is click on that reference and you've got the same thing. So you probably shouldn't word for word things, you know, directly out of encyclopedias or wiki in any way, but it works pretty good. I don't know if there's been anybody recently be able to show that there's something that's blatantly wrong with some historical recollection or things like that, but there probably is a few that I'm unaware of. Let's just get into this here. The dynastic race theory was the earliest thesis to attempt to explain how pre-dynastic Egypt developed into the sophisticated monarchy of dynastic Egypt as we know it. The theory holds that the earliest roots of the ancient Egyptian dynastic civilization were imported by invaders from Mesopotamia, who then founded the first dynasty and brought culture to the indigenous population. This theory had strong supporters in the Egyptological community in the first half of the 20th century, but has since lost a lot of mainstream support. Well, there is still some support in the idea. The problem is, I believe, that it gets a little selfish, and and people start getting selfish about it, to the point of saying, well, that's saying that they didn't have it all figured out and these people came in and put it all together, or doing something like that, and then that's just incorrect. That they already had it going on, that they already had cattle there, and we know they had cattle before the point that they ever came to it, and there's such a period of time between that and the time that they sprouted up and all of a sudden, boom, became what we know of as dynastic Egypt at the first dynasties and so on. So it couldn't have been, this popcorn event or doing like you say. Well, I would venture to say that it's one of a collective reason, and things like many of the things that I've shown comes in a wave situation. For there was a first Nakata culture, right, that predates what we even call the Nakata culture that's living there. It goes back tens of thousands of years of people having lived in the area, but not concentrated on the Nile. It became concentrated after everything started fading away, and they started utilizing all the trees to the farthest distance that they could use, and then it started to become a desert and wither away, and they pulled to the Nile from that. But there's also a few anomalies that can't be ignored, that show you that not only do they, like I say, we look at a lot of pottery, and then you don't know if they traded with them and they kept the pottery with it, like they get it with the, the olive oil comes with the jug, so you got the jug, so when you find the jugs there, they aren't making the jugs, these people are. And is that the same people anyhow? Or is it not? And what's going on here, and what comes from where? And you can quickly get an assumption that if you find things coming from a far distant land, like the lapis lazuli that's found there, that actually comes from Sumeria and further past in Afghanistan area as we know it today, then at the very earliest essence, they already had trade coming from there, or people were coming from there. Did they come and go, and decide to stay? Did they come and go and eventually invade with an army because they were like, these people haven't got their shit together? And then finally cause a havoc that got everybody together in a more, I don't know, democratic and social way, a hierarchy with their king and things and situations, because it really appears that this kingly type thing didn't show up till just a little while before the earliest dynasties that are recorded. There's also an anomaly that if you look at their records, that it goes back before the first dynasty, and everybody says, well, once you hit that Narmer and then go back and King Scorpion and all those things, that Menez and things, that's supposed to be a symbolic thing, and it just rolls back, and just like a lot of people's kings lists and things like that, they have this same type of effect. And like, so does that go off a flood type thing? Well, yeah, it actually says in their thing that they come from a place that was flooded over and had a mound area. We'll get into that here shortly. So a lot of people have made other connections. But there's not, in my mind, in my view, in my theory, there's not one exact thing that made it happen. We see this Natufian culture come in and reintegress into Africa from out of Africa that have left us all kinds of things. In fact, people might realize that, well, even though they call it the Natufians from that one site, this is a little bit bigger than that. In fact, a long time ago, they realized that. And in fact, it spans a timeage and people connected to earliest agriculture and farming techniques. And they're able to put 2 and 2 together and become 4. And what's amazing about that is whenever they spread on down into Egypt, they were able to bring agriculture, and exactly like if you were to go up back where they were before and hit the river over to the left, or looking at a map over to the right, just a hair east of that, and travel that down, that's those Tigris and Euphrates from the Bible, and the Mesopotamia, and the land between the 2 rivers, and that's one of them. That's that left-sided river, and it runs all the way down there. And you can have the same type situation. And what's odd is that they've realized now, way past the point of this theory coming out, because they didn't have the genetic ability to prove it, that, yeah, those are those exact same grains from an original source. And the cattle, too, are domesticated from back before, from up in this area, and so on. And so it all came from down there in a package deal, as they refer to it. But they're integrating with the current people that are living there. And this is also out in what we now know of as the desert area, because back at this point, it was still green. All across the Green Sahara. And I've done a thing about mermaids of the Green Sahara and so on, and cave art that shows it and everything. But also I've done one about cave art, and it's one of those things that whenever I'm going through this and I go end things, that rolls through my mind, and I just don't want to stop and go back and then go through my videos and try to find that one video that I know it's on and show you a picture of like ancient boat art that looks just like Egyptian boat art and stuff, and everybody's just real key with that. But it's up in Europe. In fact, there's a lady on a boat, and she's doing that pose that looks like a ballerina with her arms above her head, and showing you the earliest Egyptian art and how it's like these people have connectives, and those are a boat. It's got a bunch of little oars and people stuck in the boat too. Every little dash they're supposed to consider, and that's not some just little bullshit boat. Let's get into this, because I'll just keep going off. I've got more to say, but I can say different parts that go along with this as we do it. But quickly, to finish before we go into there, so there's an integration of one people into another that brings one aspect or effect into it, and then there's another people that come in, but it's not going yet. It's on its way. It is definitely headed there, but then the point reaches and all of a sudden it takes off. Same thing happened in Sumeria, but just a little bit preemptive to this. And a lot of people have made that connection, among the others that I'll talk about here. In the early 20th century, Egyptologist Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie, he's a real famous guy. He was one of the ones that really started it, and his literature that he has attached with it and things that he came up with are really pioneering in the first place. He was that guy that started to notice as he went around, well, this kind of, I guess I can deal with this, but what hell are they drilling these holes and these core drills and all these type of things? He deduced that skeletal remains found at pre-dynastic sites at Nakada in Upper Egypt, so way up the Nile, indicated the presence of two different races, with the dynastic race also referred to as the followers of Horus, or the Shemsu Hor that we've referred to before, differentiated physically by a noticeably larger skeletal structure and cranial capacity. Petrie concluded that the physical differences of the remains, in conjunction with the previously unknown burial styles, uncharacteristic tomb architecture, and the abundance of foreign artifacts, implied that this race must have been an invading, ruling elite that was responsible for the seemingly sudden rise of Egyptian civilization. Based on plentiful cultural evidence, Petrie determined that the invader race had come from Mesopotamia and imposed themselves on the native Badarian culture and became their rulers. Petrie adduced new architectural styles and the distinct Mesopotamian niched facade architecture. It's where, I'll go into it in a minute, pottery styles, cylinder seals, and a few artworks, as well as numerous pre-dynastic rock work, and tomb paintings depicted basically Mesopotamian-style boats, symbols, and figures. So, let me go back just a hair here. So it's based on this invader race, and so people have tried to take that idea as being a different race of people, but all archaeology shows they're all Caucasoid, Caucasian people that were going in there, just variations on a theme of them. And this new one that comes in seems to be a little bit larger, a little brain capacity, and a lot of people made the connection of like the ancient Cro-Magnons were a little bit bigger and stuff, and other people had gone through so much harshness it was almost like insular dwarfism, and they're like 5.5 foot tall at the time. And then here comes in these people, and they're not necessarily a culture based on height, but then all of a sudden this whole height, even including the women and everything, seemed to be a little better off. And they'd been better off for so long, and eternally pretty much, that they had been able to keep a 6 foot height whenever others had faltered and fallen. And it's in fact the reason that they had shifted and moved and ended up in the Nile in the first place, basically. So he talks about niched facade architecture, and this is that architecture facade that, here goes finger of God, where it's the walls going along here, looking down on it, and the wall will go out, in, out, in, out, in, a little effective like that. But what this really is it's thicker, like a column, and then a thin wall, so it's column, 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 and then they just put a thin wall between it. But the idea that this somehow goes in and out, in and out, in and out like that in a different architectural style than you would see at any other place And even its size, even the idea that these first things were made with mud-fired clay bricks that are just about exactly the same as the Sumerians were making. So all of that gets to something with that niche facade architecture. But when we look at that, where does that come from? Well, the ancient Sumerians used to build these hooped houses that are made out of reeds, basically. It's a reed house. And you know how the boats are made out of a bunch of bundled up reeds that are all long like a banana, and then they tweak up the ends of them so they're longer, and they put like two of them side by side, lean them in, aiming at each other, and now, hey, you can ride on that, right? And you've seen these simplistic boats that are like that, and if you put another one up on the side, the thing becomes seaworthy because it's got, enough prow to be able to go on and everything. Well, those tubes that are made out of that, you just take them and you put them over, and then they weave a wall between there, and they have another tube that goes over, and then a tube that goes over. And if you look at one of those, hell, I may pull it up here in a minute when I go to look at some other pictures for y'all, it looks very reminiscent of it, although it has an arch top, of course, by the way it's built, instead of being somewhat squared off or anything like that. And it really is, in a way, an upside down boat, but they're kind of side ribbed as opposed to having a banana beneath it. But if you put the bananas, like you usually do, underneath of that, that would be a perfect boat again, too, and have all of its stuff in the inside. And these places get huge. They literally get huge. There's a resort thing that they have over there. I'm sure there's quite a few of them, but there's one that I've seen, and I showed in an ancient video that I made years ago. It must be 3 years ago. It shows that they remake this all the time, and where the people hang out and do their little things at, they've got all these little huts and this big old one that's hooked up, and the thing is, I don't know, half a football field long and about 20 yards wide. The thing is huge, way up in the air. They've suspended fans into it and got those things going for everybody. Feels like you're lost in Casablanca or some shit. Yeah, it's like a total resort thing. But then in that video, and I'll tell you now, they show you a tablet. That tablet's like over 3,500 BC that they found, and it's got a picture kind of engraved on that tablet of one of these huts, and it looks just like that. It's made the same way. And so how long were they making these kick-ass resort huts? So it's not a hut like you might think of. But that's why that niche architecture too they have. But then pottery styles are extremely similar. And I tell you, we get into pottery and do things, and we could do that for an hour now. But a lot of people that are into pottery, they're saying, well, these people are doing certain things just like each other. But of course, just later, with the Phoenicians and a lot of other guys, we see symmetry between people and putting those extra hoops on the sides to put lids on the jars and all these things so they're usable for it, which of course we see the Phoenicians going around making sure that happens. And they're getting olive oil from these people and selling it to those people that need it, and grabbing something they got and need it and merchanting around like crazy. But there's other things like these cylinder seals, which just went across in a sentence there, but those cylinder seals, you find them in the earliest of Egyptians, and they have carved cylinder seals. And what that is that's just like the Sumerian cylinder seals that are pretty much made like a donut, about yay big around, and usually about 5 or 6 inches long, and you take a piece of clay and make it all flat, and you put it on there, and you roll the thing out like it's a dough, and it puts a beautiful picture on here of whatever they've engraved. And now what's wicked about this, and I've often talked about it, is just taking that cylinder seal and being able to carve around it to where whenever you roll it out how it's going to come out, is a advanced type technology. Whenever people talk about it and it seems to come out of nowhere, and it's like, that's not some nowhere thing. They've already got that relief idea, and this is reverse relief. So whenever you press out on the clay there comes out looking like it's made out of bas relief. You follow me? It makes the background flatter and deeper then, and it pokes it out like those Play-Doh things you may have played with when you were a kid. But they had this, and it's what's neat about that. Let me make another connection here. What is that? Well, the hole saws that drilled all the holes that we're familiar with, that the Egyptians are going crazy with, are actually making these cores that Petrie and others now have gone over and figured out they make a corkscrew, and these things must have been pushing in at over 2 tons worth of weight with diamond bits to make it carve like it does, and so on. But if you take that little core out of there that he'd wrapped a little string around, and you give it to a Sumerian there, they carve in that bas relief situation and roll it out on a thing, and look at there, that's what that are made for. So even just popping a hole out of some piece of granite becomes a superficial artwork that we're well familiar with in the Sumerians. Well, did you know that the earliest Egyptians have them going on and it fades out? There's other things too. There's a few artworks that they've got, and one of the things, I guess, let me go up here real quick and look at pre-dynastic Egypt, and just this picture that's here. Not only do they have these bowls, now this is just like that pottery, which is kick-ass. By the way, they noticed that certain people made pottery better than the others whenever everything was kicking off in the pre-dynastic. So it came in, and then the others started mimicking the other one, but you could still tell it wasn't as good. And these people that are way into pottery have gone on into it. Hell, you can watch videos about it. Some people would see it somewhat boring to get that little bit of information out, but that pottery is made, and that they can make something out of granite type rainbow Dalmatian stone that looks just like it, and it's almost as thin as it on the inside, and it mimics it on the inside and everything, and just the ability to make something like that. And you think, oh well, they found a few of those, that's wicked. And you go, no, there are tens of thousands that they found of these that were at the first of dynasties and put with this Osiris type thing of the ancient deals, and a burial that goes with the very first dynasties and stuff, like an homage thing, like maybe they had had these for generation after generation, and everybody gave up their shit to signify it's all happening. It's a wicked thing just in itself. But also this Narmer palette that's here, and this other palette that's like the Narmer palette, there's that one part on the back of it, and the necks of the creatures that are drawn on it and shown have that swivel and go up. In fact, that's what actually makes the little palette where they supposedly crush the stuff and use it for their eyes. And that's a Sumerian idea in relief. In fact, that whole master of beasts that go on there, and this followers of Horus would be very similar to just like that eagle or falcon-headed god that they have that's taken the pine cone towards the tree that you see in the Sumerians and their earliest bas reliefs and things that go along with that. So it has connections with these sacred priest type people that are making it all happen. He notices these people and says they're bigger and they got bigger brain capacity too. And because they end up being, looks like the people that make the first dynasties up here, then we have to conclude that they came in with something hot. They talk about horaha and stuff with this words here. It's real small, but the other thing, just this picture of pre-dynastic, so even just a conglomerate of that you can get this much information out of. But also we have some artwork that's on these that are showing that ballerina pose lady that's standing up, and you can find those again earlier up in Europe type parts. But that knife that's right there is known as the Gibel Arok knife. The carvings on it you can't see from here. It's got a flint blade on it and an ivory handle. What's kick-ass about it is it's got a bunch of intricate people carved all over it, and one of the things you can easily see on the hilt of the handle there is an iconography of the Master of Beasts, where one guy's holding up 2 lions. And again, that's not something you see in Egypt so much, but you sure as hell know that it exists and carries on through everybody in the Fertile Crescent except for them. But there are other connecteds, like the winged sun disk and so on. People have tried to make a few connections on it. Well, what wasn't even mentioned right there is cuneiform. Isn't that just similar and just what? Yeah, there's a whole lot more. I mean, it can go deeper and deeper of things that you could say perhaps came from the Sumerians because they've got it going on, like the shadoof. It's that bucket tilt-a-whirl thing that picks up the water, and they can pick up water from a depth away and picks it up and lets it out over here in the bag, Then you go back and pick it up and let it around. You can also use the same object to pick up stone and put counterweight on that side of it, and you can pick up something that's the weight of that stone there with pretty ease with your hands. Yeah. Both these people have that, and the brick technology and so on. So there's a lot of things. But then those boats and just that reed technology and everything. Well, boats go back way further than this. In fact, that same style of boat has shown up in Europe that I talked about with the lady with her arms up. So now we're talking about something, literally, that predates the both of them, that has a connection. Sure, one ends up with a different linguistic vocality. That doesn't mean anything. That's speech. That's a language. What's amazing about that is that all the other languages are connected all the way from India through to Ireland and stuff, as we've talked about before many times. The Proto-Indo-European linguistics, if we will, the oddity there off of that is that Sumerians have a different linguistic going on and patterns that work along with that. And then the Egyptians had something that was an Afro-Asiatic language that was a little different than that. If it was just exactly the same, we could easily make the connection. But can we make the connection that perhaps coming down there that they got with the people that were there who had already developed a morphed linguistic, and instead of forcing an entire population to beckon towards you and learn all your language in a show of togetherness, perhaps you might learn their whole language and have already learned it enough so whenever you take over, the people know what the hell you're talking about. That works. In the Bible, they talk about it as speaking in tongues and so on, but let's continue more. As well as numerous pre-dynastic rock and tomb paintings depicting Mesopotamian-style boats, symbols, and figures. That same situation. You know, one of the things that you can find of the statue of Narmer is a Sumerian-type priest statue. Its arms have been busted off, but you can still see the connective and where it went, and instead of having that little bitty beard, it's a thicker beard. Got those blue encrusted eyes and everything. Well, there's only one eye left. The other one fell out, kind of like Nefertiti. But, lo and behold, that's an armor statue, and it looks like a Sumerian priest. Well, is this the Sumerian version of Narmer in the time? No, well, it's another total connective. We can go that it's at least that. This whole thing became to be called the Dynastic Race theory. The theory further argued that the Mesopotamians then conquered both Upper and Lower Egypt and founded the First Dynasty. Pre-dynastic and First Dynasty burial sites similar to Nakata were also found at Abydos, Saqqara, and Hierakonpolis, city of the sun. So they said they were followers of Horus. Horus is represented by the sun and falcon and sky god, if you will, and how that works with agriculture and everything we've talked about before, and a lot of people know about it, but there's that same eagle, sky god, falcon type situation going on, declamating the hours of the day, but also if it's the sun, they're following the sun and the sun god type of worship. Now, I'm not saying or even trying to indicate that the people that were already there did not already have sun worship and things going on, because at least the agricultural people did whenever they came in, because we've got a sundial that's right there. Well, it's not a sundial as per se, it's more like a Stonehenge type of setup of a bunch of the rocks that did declamations. A lot of it's still hooked up to lunar calendars. As I said, in the ancient times, a lot of people were going off of that, and then key points of, solstices. And it's hooked up in that way there. So it shows you that that was going on before this thing kicked off. It isn't, let's just say it isn't inside a generation of people. But whenever it all kicked off and got together as the thing we know of as Narmer and that happened in a generation of people. Eventually. Some of these burials that they show, and whenever we go to the other connection site, see, that's what I like about the wiki that they've done. They broke it up into where you can look at certain parts of it, and instead of having one little paragraph, it basically breaks it down and says, well, click on it here, it tells you a lot more about it. and so on, and they've got different ones about each. But on that other one, it goes into it further, shows a little more pictures and so on too, and gives you an idea. We're going to go to some pictures here in a minute. How are we at? 30 minutes already? Damn, guys. Let's just go. Versions of this dynastic race model were adopted by scholars like L.A. Waddell and Brian Emery, a former chair of Egyptology at the University and College of London, though. But the decline of this theory, I'd say, the dynastic race theory is no longer an accepted thesis in the field of pre-dynastic archaeology. While there's clear evidence that the Naqada II culture borrowed abundantly from Mesopotamia, the most commonly held view today is that the achievements of the first dynasty were the result of a long period of cultural and political development. I agree wholeheartedly with that. But also, I'd say that these people coming in, they took over Naqada and had the extra little thing going on, kicked it off. They also mentioned such borrowings are much older than even Naqada II period. The Naqada II period had a large degree of continuity with Naqada I period, and the changes which did happen during the Naqada periods happened over significant amounts of time. That's like I was referring to just a moment ago, how it's not a popcorn effect, but see what comes out of this idea. Imagine if you had all the workmanship in front of you, knowing that you could build a civilization which had just gotten kicked off real good in Sumeria, and due to whatever's going on and the trade network they've got going with you, they go, you ought to kick it up another notch, and people aren't listening. And they find that they could easily take over and get this thing going, so it would be fantastic to trade with them. But in the effort of doing so, perhaps a generation or two goes past, and then the people that came in to do it no longer are even trying to get it to do the thing that goes back. It's really self-centered now. And they do still have trade with it and connections all up to there. Just one little way of looking at it. Well, there's clear evidence, though, that these people had connections. Modern Egyptology largely maintains the view that state formation occurred as a mainly indigenous process, although significant differences in morphology indicated by migration along the Nile Valley also took place. So, no, but yeah, that's basically what they're saying there somewhat. Dynastic race theory has been largely replaced by the theory that Egypt now was a hydraulic empire. This is one of the empires that work off of a river system, basically, and it controls it and everything. And yeah, that makes sense. That's how that developed and strengthened itself. And instead of being through a bunch of little rivers, or maybe like the delta down there, they had it all the way up it. And of course, it's concentrated on it to this day. You want to see how concentrated it is? See a picture at night from space whenever they show you all the lights and everything at it, and you can just see it's lit up down the Nile. It's sparse in a few places, of course, still in between, but there you go. And then you can see a big expanse out here to the left where there's really almost nothing. So in Afrocentricity, let's go through this real quick. In the 1950s, when the dynastic race theory was widely accepted in mainstream scholarship, the Senegalese scholar Cheikh Anta Diop was publicizing his theory that ancient Egyptians were black Africans or sub-Saharans. Diop paid special attention to the emergence of the dynastic race theory and claimed that European scholars supported this theory to avoid having to admit that the ancient Egyptians were black and somehow characterize them as Semitic or Caucasian. Well, we know that they were, so that's about it. You get variances on a theme of what people think whenever they try to spit out this idea, whether Cleopatra was black or, she was Greek and everybody there was white. But right before that, and where does it go back to? Funny thing is, the earliest dynasties we find, they're blue-eyed Caucasian people. And sure, they draw the males with red ochre and the females light, but so do the Greeks, the Mitanni, the Minoans, and all these other people at the time. And we don't seem confused at all about them, do we? But somebody wants to be ambiguous somewhat, and that leads to people trying to believe false beliefs and put it out there, and it ends up causing people problems by their own hands and jealousy. And it really has been debunked a long time ago, but you see it still living on quite a bit. Other prominent Afrocentricists, including Martin Banal, later also argued against the dynastic race theory in favor of a black Egyptian model. The most recent contributor to Afrocentric model of the ancient Egyptians was Sagan Magabadolabalo, I can't pronounce it, who included information from Nwapu in his book Black Egyptians, which is a misnomer. Afrocentrics particularly condemn the alleged dividing of African people into racial clusters as being new versions of the dynastic race theory and the Hamitic hypothesis. I find that strange, kind of even the twist of that thought that goes on there. But Hamitic hypothesis is, I guess, the idea that somehow one of Noah's kids, who were all from Caucasians, who landed up in the Caucasus Mountains with their boat, which is symbolic, by the way, but it also is very telling, and all their kids that are related, that somehow one of them's fourth son got cursed by Noah. Now, I don't know if you believe in the fact of Noah could even curse somebody and it would work or not, unless he's a god, but I have talked about how they're trying to make connectives with the archaic gods here, and the who's who, and Uranus got castrated and this, that, and the other, and that's what it's supposed to portray as Noah, and who is Israel, and Saturn, and so on. But that one of his kids got cursed. Well, it never says in the Bible that he turns black or anything, but they want to put it on there. So that's how black people became about, and that's really a sad idea, that you're the product of a curse. Please don't put that on yourself, because there's no indication in the Bible in any way that that happens. Let me clear this up real quick. Just logically, try to go with me. So he turned black. Okay, all right, so he's a black Caucasian now, or did they change his genetics and everything and turn him into a Negroid? No, come on. But whatever you want to believe, if they blended in a guy that had gotten dark with everybody else, that the best you might get was people that just slightly olive, but then after a while it just blends into nothing, so nothing ever happens, so there can never become a black race out of that at all. So it doesn't work that way. When genetics shows you that it doesn't work that way, and it was never intended to say that. But people that are trying to be overly inclusive try to bring about things like that. Now, this thing about dividing African peoples into racial clusters, listen, it's a fact, and easily seen if you put them together. There's a large variation of black people that are not related, even still to this day, with all the Bantu coming through and all this. There are Pygmies, there are Khoisan, there are Nilotics, there are the people of Eastern Africa and Somalis and stuff. There are in Ethiopia nowadays, which is not the Ethiopians of the Greeks, by the way, but there are very much a variation on a theme, and all these East Africans are not related whatsoever to these West African sub-Saharans, and neither are the Khoisan. And they say, oh, you want to divide them up. No, it's just a simple thing. They're not related. Yeah, it's so that's why when they talk about there's so much diversity in Africa, is that there's Caucasians have been endemic there for forever, and a couple little variations there, but then there's also all of these variations of sub-Saharans that are going on. Sure, a lot of them aren't in sub-Saharan anymore, North Africa and around the world and stuff, but when we talk about ancient times, we got to talk about the reality of the way things were, not the way that you wish that they were, or some type of farcical fantasy. There's been a revival, though. A version of this theory has been revived by some modern scholars, most notably David Rawle and Michael Rayce. David Rawle, I did a video on about this same situation almost 2 years ago now, and you can go look up of it. It's pre-dynastic Egypt, and you'll see where I'm talking about them. And it's really a 4-parter, I believe. I go into this and show you some other stuff, but I'm revisiting this again because it's been a while. They have advanced the reasons in support of a Mesopotamian origin of dynastic Egypt in books such as Rawls' Legend, The Genesis of Civilizations, and Rayce's Egypt Making. According to Rawls, there's little evidence of kingship and its rituals very much before the beginning of the first dynasties. No signs of gradual development in metalworking, art, monumental architecture, and writing, the defining criteria of that early civilization. Much of what we know about the pharaohs and their complex culture seems to have come into existence in a flash of inspiration. Roll believes the catalyst for this sudden development was the influx of Mesopotamian foreign elites who made their way into Egypt, sailing around the coastline of the Arabian Peninsula and into the Red Sea, ultimately dragging their boats across the desert. And I show this in my video there, and his connections across the Nile. With Mesopotamian style boats, crews of up to 75 people, some of which who appear to be pulling across the land. Roll believes the most dramatic evidence to support this theory is the sudden introduction of distinctly Mesopotamian niched facade architecture, also known as palace facades, which can be shown up in the earliest and pre-dynastic works where Horus is sitting up on this little building. Okay, well, what's that little building? That's a little Sumerian niched architecture there. Well, is there really one of those buildings? Yeah, and it's made out of Sumerian brick type things and stuff too. I mean, you can say it formed independently, but no, then they got the brick idea. Well, maybe they just saw it and then they came back and they all started doing it too. Well, there appears to be more to it than that, and as we've looked into the genetics, it seems like there's a lot of these people that are like that. No, you don't look at the current genetics, you look at anybody they can find from the time period we're talking about. So, dynastic sites, most notably, is the first dynasty Mastabas, which is also a Sumerian thing. It's Akara. A depiction of building using this kind of architecture are also an integral part of the Sarek, the early Egyptian seal of kingship, and is found before the first dynasty, as I was just saying, as well as Nakata II, or Dynasty 0. So he says this is highly improbable that such specialized building techniques were independently invented in two widely separated regions at the same historical period without cultural transmission, and it sure wasn't a different race of people. It was something totally separate. For there's connections that are far too much been made, hell, just in this video alone, of how they're the same people having come down before into these different environments, and now somebody that got together with the 2 or 3 things here that kicked them all off wasn't quite going on here as much, and they were able to come over here with that extra little +1 tag and put it onto there. The people consolidated to it, and boom, there goes pre-dynastic Egypt. There's also a flood that happens in Sumeria and takes it out, and it starts being an Akkadian thing, and you wonder where all the people went. Well, they scattered somewhat, and the ones that were left across up, just like the Abraham story and so on. Others, if you got flooded out down a river, you'd think that's a different story, and I did a recent video again about the Japhethites on how you end up with a boat up there. But that boat could come out the Gulf, and all you got to do is go around to the right and go in, and there you are. And it wasn't like they didn't know about it. Everybody's well aware of it. So in addition to the evidence available at Petri, proponents also of the similarities in the names of divinities and places and the religious beliefs of the two cultures too, and independent regions of regalia. For example, the primeval mound of the Egyptians' first creation was called the Island of Nun, and was surrounded by the waters of Nun, while the Sumerian name for the great temple of their original city Eridu was Nun-Ki, and it was surrounded by water, and they had taken and cut out and made it to where it goes around it, and effectively made a little island into it that during the flood got all washed away. The mighty palace, and it was built on an island in the reed swamps. Several scholars have also noted that the name Osiris is a Greek pronunciation, and that the god would have been called Asar in Egyptians, while the